says America deserves better.
He's a war hero because he was captured. I like people that weren't captured, okay?
I don't know what I said. I don't remember.
And Mexico will pay for the wall.
I moved on her like a
You also had people that were very fine people on both sides.
I love WikiLeaks.
I know nothing about WikiLeaks.
America has a choice. New Hampshire, 2019. A better America starts here.
Some very bad news for President Trump's reelection campaign. The President of the United States is now facing something we have seen very rarely in American political history, and virtually every time it happened, it was the beginning of the road to defeat for the incumbent's presidential reelection campaign. Donald Trump has a challenger in the Republican presidential primaries. A Republican is finally running against Donald Trump and Trumpism. A Republican has finally had enough. And history shows that is the single worst thing that can happen to an incumbent president, to be challenged for the nomination within his own party. The usual scenario is the challenger inflicts enough damage on the incumbent president during the primary season that the incumbent president cannot win re-election. The modern history of this begins in 1968 when Democratic Senator Eugene McCarthy did the unthinkable and announced his candidacy to run in just 4 presidential primaries against incumbent Democratic President Lyndon Johnson. Gene McCarthy did not believe that he could defeat Lyndon Johnson for the nomination, but he was running against Lyndon Johnson's war in Vietnam, and he believed his candidacy was the only way for Americans to get a chance to vote against Lyndon Johnson's war in Vietnam. He wanted to put Vietnam on the ballot. Gene McCarthy scored what was considered a resounding victory in the New Hampshire primary by coming in such a strong second to the President of the United States. And by the end of that week, there was a second challenger to President Lyndon Johnson from within his own party. New York's Democratic Senator Robert Kennedy jumped into the race against Lyndon Johnson. We had never seen anything like this. 2 powerful challengers against an all-powerful incumbent Democratic president who had won a landslide in the last election. And the pressure from these 2 challengers against the incumbent president forced something no one saw coming, something that shocked the country, the President of the United States giving up, withdrawing from his own re-election campaign.
I shall not seek, and I will not accept the nomination of my party for another term as your president.
No one who saw that can forget that moment. And then all hell broke loose in the Democratic campaign. Bobby Kennedy was assassinated. Gene McCarthy lost the nomination fight to Vice President Hubert Humphrey, Lyndon Johnson's chosen successor, and the Democrats went on to lose the White House in November. 8 years later, it was the Republicans' turn. California's former Governor Ronald Reagan challenged Republican President Gerald Ford for the Republican nomination. President Ford held on to win the nomination and then go down to defeat to President Jimmy Carter. 4 years later, the Democrats did it again. Another Kennedy, Senator Ted Kennedy, challenged incumbent Democratic President Jimmy Carter in the Democratic primaries, and once again, the president held on to win the nomination of his party, but President Carter was so weakened by the primary challenge that he lost his re-election campaign to Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan was not challenged in Republican primaries and was reelected easily, winning 49 states. When his Republican successor, George H.W. Bush, ran for re-election in 1992, he was challenged in the Republican primaries by Pat Buchanan. Pat Buchanan scored a Gene McCarthy-like upset in the New Hampshire primary by coming in a shockingly strong second to the incumbent president of the United States. But even though Pat Buchanan did not win a single primary, he weakened President Bush's re-election campaign and his grip on Republican voters to the point where President Bush lost the White House to Democratic challenger Bill Clinton. Democratic President Bill Clinton was not challenged by a Democrat in his re-election campaign, and his re-election victory over Republican Bob Dole was never really in doubt. The next president, George W. Bush, was not challenged in his re-election campaign by a Republican from within his party, and so was able to hang on for a narrow win over Democrat John Kerry in President Bush's reelection campaign. Then came the Obama presidency, with President Obama facing no challengers in his own party during his reelection campaign. And so President Obama went into the general election at full strength and won a solid reelection victory. And here we are again tonight with a challenge to an incumbent president from within his own party. These challengers have always been history makers. They have always turned the tide of history against the incumbent president. So far, they have never been there at the end of the road when the electoral votes are being counted on that Tuesday night in November. But the president in their own party, who they challenged in the primaries, always ends up on the losing side of the Electoral College. Donald Trump's challenger is a lot more credible than the last one we saw, Pat Buchanan. He is the former Republican governor of Massachusetts, William Weld, who served 2 terms as governor. Prior to that, he served as the U.S. attorney in Boston, the top federal prosecutor in Boston. Like Barack Obama, he is a graduate of Harvard Law School, and like President Kennedy and a few other presidents, he is a graduate of Harvard College. Bill Weld is not well known nationally, but he is already polling at 8% among Republicans. And I know that sounds low to you now, but it is higher than what Donald Trump was polling at this point on the campaign calendar 4 years ago. At this point in the campaign calendar 4 years ago, Bernie Sanders was polling at only 8% in the Democratic primaries. Current polls show Donald Trump with 54% of the Republican primary vote, with 8% definitely voting for Bill Weld and another 20% currently leaning toward Trump, but they could vote for Bill Weld. Bill Weld is in a position to knock off Donald Trump. Maybe not stop him from getting the nomination, but history shows challengers like Bill Weld have done damage to presidential nominees that cannot be repaired by Election Day. Bill Weld officially launched his presidential campaign yesterday and released this video yesterday.
Today we need Bill Weld more than ever, because America deserves better.
He's a war hero because he was captured. I like people that weren't captured, okay?
I don't know what I said. I don't remember.
And Mexico will pay for the wall.
I moved on her like a
You also had people that were very fine people on both sides.
I love WikiLeaks.
I know nothing about WikiLeaks.
America has a choice. New Hampshire, 2019. A better America starts here.
Joining us now, the newest entry in the presidential campaign, former Massachusetts Governor William Weld. Governor Weld, thank you very much for joining us tonight. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Lawrence. It's a great pleasure to be with you, as always. One point of order. I actually didn't compare myself to a Fisher cat. I compared Donald Trump to a Fisher cat via a sort of oblique compliment. I said he has a lot of animal cunning. And then I added, but so does a Fisher cat or a wolverine, which are the 2 meanest animals in the Northeast woods. And you wouldn't exactly invite a Fisher cat or a wolverine home to dinner with the kids. So
okay.
That's how that animal came up. But Rachel's right about the animal. It's the animal that Rachel Carson brought in to eat all the porcupines on those islands in her novel Silent Spring.
All right. Well, now it's making a lot more sense. So you don't have an official mascot animal for your campaign yet?
No, I don't. But I'm very serious about this campaign, Lawrence. I think a lot of permanent damage is being done to our country if nothing changes the arc of the last 2 years. If we have 6 more years of spending ourselves into bankruptcy without a thought about it, and insulting our allies and eroding our military alliances abroad, and cozying up to dictators and insulting everyone who's part of our lattice work of defense, there's no limit to the damage that can be done.
Now, you're coming to us from New Hampshire tonight. That is obviously where you're going to concentrate, being from the neighboring state of Massachusetts. You've spent all your life in the region. You know New Hampshire well. You know it better than Donald Trump. Is it your strategy to try to land one of those Gene McCarthy or Pat Buchanan blows in the New Hampshire primary and then see how far you can get after that?
Well, my strategy is to win several of the New England states outright, one of them, of course, being New Hampshire, and then to go on to the Mid-Atlantic, New York, Pennsylvania, Maryland, Delaware. Then probably before then, California, Oregon, and Washington. The West is fertile ground. The president's barely welcome in California. And then parts of the Intermountain West and the Southwest are also good ground for me after my run 3 years ago, and take it from there. You know, the last call will be the Rust Belt states. You're talking about how to get to a majority. And states like Wisconsin, which the president won, and giving him the victory, I don't know. That's Bob La Follette's state. That's my kind of Republican. And I think I could play well up there as well. So we'll see at the end of the day. But right now, we're on day one of my campaign, and I'm already in second place. How many of those 12, 15 Democrats would give their ITs to be in second place right now?
That's right.
I ask you.
Governor, what is your number one issue, policy issue, that you're running against Donald Trump with?
I think it probably is the spending. He hasn't vetoed a dollar in spending. As you probably know, Lawrence, I was ranked the #1 most fiscally conservative governor in the United States when I was in office. And I think most Republicans think that we deserve an economic conservative in the White House. When I took over the state of Massachusetts, the outgoing administration said that the state was technically bankrupt. Well, let me tell you something. If we keep running trillion-dollar deficits, and now with the president's new budget, another $7.9 trillion, admittedly a 10-year budget, but that would get us up to $30 trillion of accumulated deficit. If the Chinese stop buying our bonds, we'd be just as insolvent as a state would be if it couldn't borrow to meet its deficit. So, you know, the federal government has to start doing what households do, which is balance their checkbook. And Trump is president.
Is it fair to say that you will be running as the kind of Republican that you always ran as in Massachusetts?
Well, yeah. I mean, it's no secret that I'm more open and tolerant, very much so, on social issues than the president is. I made room for everybody. I reached across the aisle. My cabinet was 8 women and 3 men. It always included minorities. I had reached out not only to the other party, but to Hispanics, South Asian, East Asian, African Americans, Caribbean Americans. Everybody felt included, and that's why we got 71% of the vote on my reelect, having gotten only 50.1% coming in.
And, you know, I remember you as something of a showman as governor, and I retain in my visual memory only one image of your entire time as governor. And we're going to roll the video of it as we speak. You'll remember it. You were signing a bill that was about water cleanup, and you dove into the Charles River to show your commitment to cleaning polluted water in the area. And we all saw that brown water splash up around your dive. And so you're someone who is as willing as Donald Trump to embrace the showmanship of campaigning.
Oh, I am a showman. And the other man in that picture when I dove in was Bob Durand, who was Secretary of Environmental Affairs. And he came up to an event I had at the Airport Diner on Brown Avenue in Manchester today just to show his solidarity with the campaign. He and I have been hunting and fishing buddies in New Hampshire, among other places, for a long time. But that's the kind of friend you like to have.
Governor, well, we're just getting started on this conversation. When you come back, I want you to tell us if you think that Canada is a national security threat and we have to have tariffs against Canada imposed by the President of the United States, and all sorts of other issues I know you want to talk about. But as your campaign was launched, I just wanted to note its historical significance in our recent history of challenges within a party of an incumbent president. So we wanted to get you on as quickly as we could. We've got other business we have to get to in this hour. Governor Bill Weld, thank you very much for joining us tonight. Really appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Lawrence.